You're listening to the Great Pelican Schism of 2026, a story about a theological crisis involving waterfowl and biscuits, written by Lefki Karantoni. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved. Chapter 1, The Incident with the Duchess's Pelican. It was a perfectly ordinary day in Lower Chipping Sodbury when the Duchess of Penge discovered that her pelican, Sir Reginald, had developed strong opinions about the Church of England. The bird had been found at 6:47 a.m. perched on the village war memorial, wearing the vicar's spare cassock and wicker hat, and refusing to come down unless someone addressed him as Your Grace. The vicar, a mild man named Timothy who had once apologised to a lamppost for bumping into it, stood below with a packet of digestives and an expression that said he had accepted that God sometimes tests you with waterfowl. "Reginald," he called up wearily, "this really isn't on. Matins starts in 20 minutes, and the congregation gets tetchy when the sermon smells of fish." From above came a haughty squawk that somehow managed to convey both contempt and a flawless received pronunciation accent. "Tell the Archbishop," Sir Reginald replied, "that I find his position on female bishops deeply disappointing. Also, someone fetch me a better hat. This one itches." The Duchess arrived shortly after, still in her dressing gown and pearls, clutching a thermos of Earl Grey as though she were a hostage negotiator. She looked at the pelican, then at the small crowd of villagers who had gathered with the quiet British instinct to watch disaster unfold while pretending it wasn't happening. "Reginald, darling," she said, in the same tone one might use to ask the postman not to leave the bills in the hydrangeas, "you're causing a scene. Come down and we'll discuss your theological concerns over a light luncheon. I've had cook prepare sardines." Sir Reginald ruffled his feathers, adjusted the cassock with one webbed foot, and fixed her with a beady eye. "I'm afraid not, Mummy. I've unionised." A small silence fell. Even the ducks in the pond seemed embarrassed. "Unionised," the Duchess repeated flatly. "Yes, the Pelican Brotherhood of Lower Chipping Sodbury. We demand better working conditions, proper nesting rights, and an immediate end to being called that bloody great bird by Colonel Blenkinsop." Colonel Blenkinsop, who had been pretending to read the Times on a nearby bench, slowly lowered his newspaper and muttered, "I stand by my assessment." At that moment, a small, perfectly ordinary-looking man in a tweed jacket and sensible brogues stepped forward. He was carrying a clipboard and had an attitude which revealed that he had come to audit the end of the world and found the paperwork lacking. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm from the council. We've had a complaint about unauthorised ecclesiastical occupation of public monuments. Also, the Pelican has filed for tax exemption on religious grounds." The Duchess took a long sip of her tea. "Well," she said, "this has all become rather tiresome. Shall we adjourn to the orangery? I find these sorts of revolutions go down much better with scones." Sir Reginald let out a triumphant squawk that scattered 3 pigeons and 1 very confused corgi. And that, dear reader, was how the Great Pelican Schism of 2026 began. Chapter 2, Gerald the Radical. Nobody was entirely sure when the corgi had arrived. It was one of those village corgis that simply existed, perpetually underfoot, answerable to no one, and harbouring what the postmistress described as an unsettling awareness. Its name was Gerald. It had bitten a magistrate in 2019 and never been formally charged. Gerald sat down beside the war memorial and regarded Sir Reginald with the weary recognition of one radical to another. The man from the council, whose name was Mr. Derek Finch, and whose entire professional existence could be summarised as trying, opened his clipboard and clicked his pen. He was prepared to record something no form had been designed for. Right. I'll need the Pelican's full legal name. Sir Reginald Horatio Featherstone Hoare Penge III, the Duchess supplied without a flicker of irony. Hyphenated. Of course it is. Mr. Finch wrote this down. He did not ask how to spell Featherstone Hoare. He had lived in England long enough to know that the answer would only make things worse. And the nature of the complaint? He's taken my cassock, the vicar offered quietly, as though confessing to a minor sin of his own. He's stolen it, Sir Reginald corrected from above. Taken implies, I intend to return it. I do not. It has excellent drape. The crowd had grown to 14 people, a retriever, and Mrs. Antrobus from the shop, who had brought a folding chair and a cornetto. She settled in. She had once watched a planning dispute about a conservatory escalate into a 3-day standoff involving a JCB and the rural dean. Is anyone, Mr. Finch said, addressing the crowd with careful neutrality, because he already knew the answer, in a position to get the Pelican down? 14 faces performed the precise British manoeuvre of looking in slightly different directions while remaining absolutely still. I thought not. The Duchess finished her tea. She examined the thermos lid. She screwed it back on with deliberate calmness, having decided that this was no longer a problem to be solved, but a situation to be managed, and that the difference between the two was roughly 1 gin and tonic. Reginald, she said, I am going home. I am going to dress. When I return, I expect you to have come to your senses, or at the very least, to have prepared a formal list of demands that I can ignore over breakfast. Already done, Mummy. Sir Reginald produced, from where nobody could anatomically explain, a rolled scroll of paper, which he dropped with great ceremony. It landed at the vicar's feet. Timothy picked it up, unrolled it, read the first 3 lines, and sat down on the curb. He wants a diocese, Timothy said faintly. He wants a what? Colonel Blenkinsop stood up so fast his Times fell into a puddle. The Diocese of Lower Chipping Sodbury and surrounding ponds. Timothy's voice had taken on a hollow quality. He was watching his faith rearrange itself without his permission in real time. He's drawn a map. It's actually quite well done. Mr. Finch leaned over, examined the map, and made a small involuntary noise of professional respect. He's included parish boundaries, he added, and a car park. Gerald the corgi yawned, turned in a circle, and lay down. He had seen enough revolutions. The important thing now was a nap, and if the universe was feeling generous, a sausage. Chapter 3. The Synod of the Orange Juice Carton. The Duchess returned 43 minutes later wearing a tweed skirt suit that looked as though it had been starched by disappointed ancestors. She carried a fresh thermos. She briefly considered ringing the police, but remembered they were still dealing with the 2024 incident involving the escaped llamas, and decided against it. She surveyed the scene. Sir Reginald had now attracted 2 more pelicans, a smaller, nervous one named Kevin who kept saying sorry in a Welsh accent, and a large, brooding female called Dame Marjorie, who had apparently defected from the council's own ornamental pond and was demanding equal representation for the unfairly beaked. Mr. Finch's clipboard had grown a second clipboard. Gerald the corgi had acquired a small paper crown made from a discarded Waitrose receipt and was wearing it like a monarch who had never been asked to rule. "Right," said the Duchess, addressing the war memorial as though it were a disappointing garden party. "Let us get this over with before the rain starts and ruins everyone's suede. Reginald, present your demands. Concisely. I have bridge at 3. Sir Reginald cleared his throat with a noise like a drain being unblocked by an angry goose. "Point 1, he declaimed, full diocesan status with tithes paid in mackerel. Point 2, the immediate decommissioning of all plastic bread bags within a 5-mile radius. They are an affront to dignity and also get stuck in my beak. Point 3, he paused dramatically. Gerald shall be appointed my official bishop of Naps. A ripple went through the crowd. Mrs. Antrobus nearly dropped her second cornetto. Gerald lifted his head, regarded the pelican with one eye, and gave a single solemn tail thump that somehow sounded like, "I accept, but only on Wednesdays." The vicar made a small whimpering noise. "I'm not sure canon law covers this." "Bugger canon law," said Sir Reginald cheerfully. "We're writing our own. It's going to be mostly about fish and comfortable perches. Chapter 7 is, no one is allowed to say, 'It's just bloody a bird,' ever again." Mr. Finch flipped to a new page and wrote, "Possible breach of the Local Government Act, 1972, miscellaneous avian coup," in neat biro. At that precise moment, something happened that nobody present would ever be able to explain satisfactorily at the inquest. A small Tesco delivery van rounded the corner, driven by a man called Barry, who was only trying to drop off 3 litres of orange juice and a multi-pack of Jaffa cakes. The van slowed. Barry leaned out of the window, took in the cassock-wearing pelican, the corgi wearing a receipt crown, the Duchess in full battle tweed, and the growing crowd. He blinked once, then, in the flattest black country accent known to man, he said, "Mate, is that pelican running for Pope?" Before anyone could answer, the side door of the van slid open by itself. Inside, stacked neatly, were 36 cartons of orange juice with pulp. One of them had already burst. Orange juice was dripping onto the road in a slow, sticky stream that looked like the start of a new sacrament. Dame Marjorie the Pelican descended from the memorial in one graceful swoop, landed directly in the puddle of juice, and began baptizing herself while shouting, "This is the blood of the new covenant. Tastes of breakfast." Kevin the nervous pelican immediately fainted into a bed of begonias. Gerald stood up, walked over to the orange juice, lapped once and declared, in a voice that definitely belonged to a corgi, but somehow also to a minor public school headmaster. "Acceptable vintage. A little young, but it has legs." The Duchess closed her eyes for a long second. "Mr. Finch," she said quietly, "I believe we have now moved beyond the jurisdiction of the parish council and into the realm of whatever this is." Mr. Finch looked at his clipboards, then at the orange juice-drenched pelican, now attempting to ordain the vicar by dribbling pulp onto his head, and made the only rational decision available to a mid-level local government officer. He took out his phone and rang his wife. "Love," he said calmly, "I'm going to be late home. There's been a schism. Bring the good biscuits. And possibly a priest. Not the vicar. He's busy being anointed." Mrs. Finch arrived 22 minutes later with a Tupperware of shortbread and Father Desmond O'Connell from St Agatha's, who had been watching the snooker and was not best pleased. Father Desmond was a large, unhurried man who had spent 31 years in the priesthood and had long ago concluded that the Almighty's sense of humour was, at best, unreliable. He stepped out of Mrs. Finch's Nissan Micra, surveyed the war memorial, the 3 pelicans, the crowned corgi, the orange juice now seeping into the flower bed, the vicar sitting in it with pulp in his hair, and the vacant serenity of the recently broken, and blessed himself. "Right," he said. "Which one's in charge?" Sir Reginald spread his wings to their full magnificent span, scattering droplets of Tropicana across Colonel Blenkinsop's times. "I am the Archbishop of Lower Chipping Sodbury, the Right Reverend Sir Reginald Horatio Featherstone Hoare Penge III, defender of the fish, shepherd of the unfairly beaked, and, as of 11 minutes ago, winner of the village Instagram poll for most influential resident. The corgi came second. The vicar was not in the top 5. Timothy from his puddle did not contest this. Father Desmond regarded the pelican for a while. He had once conducted an exorcism on a dishwasher in Wolverhampton. He had ministered to a woman in Dudley who believed her cat was channeling the spirit of Cardinal Wolsey. He had, on one occasion he preferred not to discuss, been headbutted by a goat during a nativity. None of this had prepared him adequately, but all of it had prepared him generally. "You're not an archbishop," he said with patience. He had once explained the doctrine of transubstantiation to a hen party in Magaluf, and it showed. "You're a pelican." "I am a pelican, and an archbishop. The two are not mutually exclusive. The Church has survived worse. Have you met Henry VIII? Father Desmond turned to the Duchess. "How long has this been going on?" "Since breakfast. He was perfectly normal at supper last night, had his sardines, watched Pointless, went to bed. This morning," she gestured at the cassock, the wicker hat, the scroll, the general ecclesiastical chaos. "This—" "Pointless often has that effect," Father Desmond said gravely. Barry, the Tesco driver, who had been standing beside his van in a state of philosophical paralysis, finally spoke. "Does anyone still want the Jaffa cakes? Only I've got a drop-in yate at 2:30 and me sat-navs playing up." Nobody answered him. Nobody ever answered Barry. He had a face that crowds looked through, the human equivalent of a terms and conditions page. He placed the Jaffa cakes on the bench beside Colonel Blenkinsop, who accepted them with a curt nod and the unspoken understanding that in times of crisis, biscuits pass between men without ceremony. Dame Marjorie, still dripping with orange juice and righteousness, waddled over to Father Desmond and fixed him with an eye that contained somehow the entire history of feminist theology and also the memory of a good trout. "We want seats on the parish council," she said. "Voting seats. Not the little plastic chairs at the back where they put the brownies." "You're a pelican," Father Desmond repeated, though with noticeably less conviction than the first time. "And Margaret Thatcher was a grocer's daughter. What's your point?" Mr. Finch, who had now filled 4 pages of his clipboard and started a 5th on the back of a parking notice, raised his hand like a schoolboy. "I feel I should mention," he said, "that the council does technically have a provision for non-human representation. Section 14(b) of the 2003 Community Engagement Charter. It was meant for service dogs, but it doesn't specifically say service dogs. It says non-human community stakeholders with demonstrable local ties." Everyone looked at him. I read a lot, he said, shrugging. Kevin, who had recovered from his faint and was now sitting upright in the begonias with a dazed look, as if he had just remembered he'd left the gas on, raised one tentative wing. He said. Sorry, could we also get a bench? The pond edge is murder on the knees. Sorry. Stop apologising, Kevin, Dame Marjorie snapped. You're part of a revolution. Act like it. Sorry. Kevin paused. Sorry for saying sorry. Gerald the corgi, still wearing his Waitrose crown, trotted over to Kevin and sat beside him in a gesture that was either solidarity or proximity to biscuit crumbs. It was impossible to tell. Chapter 4. How we all learned to live with feathers in the communion wine. The afternoon had reached that delicate British tipping point where revolution starts to feel like a committee meeting with better snacks. Father Desmond sighed the sigh of a man who had seen too many things and still had to file a report about them. He looked at Sir Reginald, then at Dame Marjorie, then at Gerald, who was now delicately licking orange pulp off Kevin's left foot in what might have been either pastoral care or mild cannibalism. Right, said Father Desmond. Let's do this the Anglican way. We'll form a working group. A horrified silence fell. Even the pelicans looked momentarily shaken. Nothing kills radical energy quite like the suggestion of a working group. The Duchess seized the moment with the reflexes of a woman who had once chaired 3 simultaneous village fêtes without bloodshed. Excellent. Agenda Item 1. Seating. Dame Marjorie, you may have 2 seats on the parish council, but they must be the wipe-clean ones. We're not having fish oil on the minutes again. Dame Marjorie considered this. And a parking space for the pond. You don't drive. I have staff. You have Kevin. Kevin tried to look like staff and mostly succeeded in looking like a pelican who had just been promoted beyond his competence. Mr. Finch consulted his growing stack of paperwork. We can offer observer status with speaking rights, but only if you promise not to. Do that thing where you regurgitate fish during debates, when Duchess brings you along. Councillor Mrs. Patel is still having flashbacks from last year's budget meeting. Sir Reginald flapped indignantly. That was a perfectly valid expression of dissent. It was on the Treasurer's laptop. Details. Barry the Tesco driver, who had given up on Yate and was now eating his own Jaffa cakes out of quiet despair, raised a hand. Can I just say, if we're doing compromises, I'd quite like my van back. The orange juice is starting to attract bees. Gerald chose that moment to stand up, shake himself, and walk slowly but purposefully towards the war memorial. The crowd parted for him the way the Red Sea might have parted for a small, opinionated dog who had already bitten a magistrate once and clearly remembered how. He sat down directly beneath Sir Reginald, looked up, and spoke in the same eerily posh voice that had unsettled the entire village since 2018. I propose, Gerald said, that we dissolve the schism, merge the new diocese back into the existing one, and in return the pelicans receive lifelong supplies of sardines, a dedicated bench with a small roof for when it rains, and the right to deliver 1 sermon per year, provided it does not exceed 7 minutes and contains no more than 2 fish-based metaphors. He paused, then added with chilling deadpan, Also, the vicar gets his cassock back. It smells. Timothy, still sitting in the orange juice puddle, whispered, "Thank you, Gerald," with gratitude. Sir Reginald stared down at the corgi for a long, considering moment. Then, like a CEO accepting a golden parachute he secretly knew was generous, He inclined his head. Very well, but I want it in writing. And I want the sermon slot on Christmas Eve, midnight, prime time. Dame Marjorie narrowed her eyes, and Kevin gets a cushion. Kevin gets 2 cushions, Gerald conceded magnanimously. Kevin whispered, sorry. Thank you. The Duchess clapped her hands once, the sound sharp enough to make Colonel Blenkinsop drop his half-eaten Jaffa cake. Then it's settled. We shall have a small service of reconciliation next Sunday. Bring your own fish. And someone please hose down the vicar before he sets. Mr. Finch closed his final clipboard with a snap that sounded oddly like relief. I'll minute this as successful community engagement event with minor avian involvement. No one above grade 6 needs to know the details. As the crowd began to disperse, Mrs. Antrobus folding her chair with satisfaction because she got her money's worth from a cornetto, Father Desmond turned to the Duchess and said quietly, You do realise this isn't actually over. Next week he'll want a podcast. The Duchess smiled. She had survived worse than ecclesiastical pelicans. Let him try, she said. I control the Wi-Fi password. Sir Reginald, now divesting himself of the cassock with grace, looked down at Gerald, who was halfway through a victorious nap. You know, the pelican said conversationally, for a corgi, you drive a hard bargain. Gerald opened one eye. Someone has to, he replied. The rest of you are all completely mad. And with that, the Great Pelican Schism of 2026 ended not with a bang, nor even a loud squawk, but with the inevitable sound of 14 villagers, 3 pelicans, 1 corgi, and a mildly traumatized vicar, all agreeing that tea and biscuits were probably the answer after all. Though nobody could quite explain why the orange juice cartons kept turning up on the war memorial for the next 6 months, or why Gerald's Waitrose receipt crown was later found in the church vestry, carefully preserved under glass. Some things, even in lower Chipping Sodbury, were simply best left as local legend. The end. Thank you for listening to The Great Pelican Schism of 2026, written by Lefki Karantoni. If you'd like to explore more of her work, visit www.lefkikarantoni.com.